I'm Alicia, 32 years old, and if someone asked me about the moment that changed my life, I'd say it all began with what seemed like an ordinary phone call. One quiet evening, just minutes after saying goodbye to my parents, I accidentally heard a truth I was never meant to know. The cold words, the cruel laughter of my sister, and then it hit me my family wasn't standing by me out of love, but because of money. From that moment on, everything collapsed. Trust, memories all shattered into cracks that could never be mended. I once believed I had a close, loving family, but the truth was, I was nothing more than a living bank to the people I loved most. Stay until the end of this video, because my story isn't just about pain, it's about reclaiming my dignity, my freedom, and the truth. The next morning, the first weekday sunlight slipped through the curtains and fell on the wooden table in my kitchen in Lexington, Kentucky. The familiar smell of coffee filled the house, but today that smell didn't feel as pleasant as usual. Every footstep, every clink of fork on plate made my chest tighten. I tried to act normal, even though I had barely slept the night before. At exactly 7, the three of them, my father, my mother, and my sister Melissa, came into the kitchen, one by one. I bought this house 3 years ago after inheriting part of Grandpa's estate. Back then, I thought I was lucky. I could take care of my parents in old age and help Melissa after her fashion business failed. But now, after what I heard last night, everything felt strange. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My father didn't look up. He answered shortly, "Yeah, morning." He held the sports page and sat in his usual chair. My mother smiled, a smile I now only felt was forced. "You already made coffee? Smells lovely." She started talking about the new neighbor and the car they bought, her voice higher and brighter than usual, like she was trying to cover something up. I watched every movement. Dad drank his coffee faster than normal, his hand shaking a little. Mom avoided my eyes, while Melissa, wearing the expensive silk robe I gave her for her birthday last year, yawned and stared at her phone. "Is there any pastry?" she asked lazily, without looking at me. Everything looked normal, but in each small action I felt the tension. They knew. They knew I might have heard something. I washed the dishes, trying to hide my face as I watched my parents. Inside, doubt rose like a tide. Were the smiles, the compliments, the "thank you for your hard work" from before just a thin cover for calculating intentions? At noon, when everyone left the house, I sat alone in my small office by the window. On the desk were my laptop, a cold cup of coffee, and a notebook. I opened the Notes app on my phone and typed the first line. Monday, 8:47 a.m. Dad avoids eye contact. Mom talks too much. Melissa doesn't care. It felt like collecting evidence for a case where I was the victim and also the investigator. The next day, Tuesday, I paid more attention. Coming home from the software company where I work as a programmer, I saw Melissa at the kitchen table, sneaking a look at my laptop. When I walked in, she jumped and quickly closed it. "I was just checking the weather," she said fast, her voice trembling. I smiled faintly and said nothing, but wrote another note. Melissa, 6:12 p.m., checked laptop, said weather as an excuse. That evening, Dad sat in front of the TV, flipping channels. After a few quiet minutes, he asked, "You still have that investment account, right? The market's been up and down. I'm just worried about you." His voice sounded calm, but his eyes avoided mine, and the question felt more like a test than care. I answered lightly, "I'm fine, Dad. Don't worry." My mother was different. She brought home many shopping bags, shoes, handbags, perfume. "You know, sometimes women should treat themselves a little," she said, smiling brightly, not noticing a receipt peeking out of a Chanel bag for nearly $2,000. That night I sat at my desk and opened every electronic receipt and bank statement. Numbers don't lie. There were charges I never made. A $500 dinner at a fancy restaurant, purchases at a boutique in Louisville, and several small repeated transfers to a strange account. I began to piece together my suspicions into a clearer picture. On Wednesday morning, Melissa was at the table, texting nonstop. "Anything new at work?" I asked experimentally. She didn't look up. "No, I'm thinking of a new collection," she said. I smiled, and looked at her phone. It showed TikTok, not designs. That night, I wrote in my notes, Melissa pretending to be busy. Dad asks about investments. Mom spends a lot. Everything revolves around money. Outside, it rained lightly over Lexington. I watched the wet streetlight through the window and realized I was living inside a perfect family play. They still acted loving, but behind the curtain were greed and fake smiles. I was no longer the naive Alicia who believed love alone was enough. I started watching, writing things down, and making plans. If they could hide this from me for years, I could pretend not to know until I found the whole truth. On Thursday morning, I made coffee as always and placed a cup in front of my father. He forced a smile and asked, "Have you seen Melissa working harder lately?" I looked at him and replied, smiling, "Yes, I see everything, Dad." He nodded, not knowing my answer held more meaning than he thought. Inside me, a plan had formed. I was not the Alicia of yesterday. I would stay quiet, observe, and wait for the right moment. This time, I didn't just want to know the truth, I wanted them to face it. 3 days later, I knew I couldn't take it anymore. All the pieces I'd gathered over the week, the half-truths, the averted glances, the shady receipts, the drained bank accounts, had finally formed a complete picture, but I needed something solid, undeniable proof they couldn't talk their way out of. On Friday night, around scene PM, when everyone was already in their rooms, I quietly walked down to the basement. My father always called it the financial records room. A small, cold, slightly damp space filled with old boxes, contracts, and bank files. I turned on a small lamp. Its dim yellow light revealed a thick layer of dust over everything. I went through folder after folder until I found a black binder labeled Alicia Estate. My heart pounded. I opened it. Inside was a copy of my grandfather's inheritance, documents the same papers, confirming that he had left everything to me when he passed in 2019. Nearly $1.2 million in stocks and investments. But tucked at the bottom was an extra page, an authorization form with a signature identical to mine, giving my father temporary management rights over my assets while I was working abroad. I had never signed that paper. Next to it were records of regular transfers from my account to those under my parents' names. A few even went to a secondary account belonging to Melissa. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling. Every suspicion was now a clear, painful truth. My family had deceived me not just with words but with actions, and with the trust I had once given them completely. I don't know how long I sat there. When I finally looked up, it was nearly 1 a.m. I heard footsteps creaking on the floor above me. Someone was awake. I turned off the light, holding my breath. The steps stopped right above the living room. A shadow passed by the basement door crack. I froze. After a few tense moments, the footsteps retreated upstairs. It was my father. I knew that if I stayed silent, they would only take more. But if I confronted them, I needed to be ready. So, I copied every file, took photos, and sent them to a private backup email. Then I went back to my room, lying in the dark, listening to the ticking clock, counting down to the morning that would change everything. Saturday morning, I woke early, made breakfast as usual, coffee, toast, fried eggs. Everything looked normal, but inside me was a storm. When the three of them entered the kitchen, I smiled. "We need to talk." My father looked up, frowning slightly. "About what, sweetheart?" I placed the folder on the table. "About these." The air turned heavy, frozen. Melissa frowned. My mother's hand trembled as she held her coffee cup. I looked at each of them in turn. "I've read everything. The authorization, the transfers, all of it. How long were you planning to keep this from me?" Dad tried to sound calm. "Alicia, you've misunderstood. I was just managing the funds for you while you were overseas, remember?" I let out a dry laugh. "I've never worked abroad, Dad, and I certainly never signed anything allowing that." Mom jumped in, her voice shaking. "Sweetheart, it's not what you think. We just borrowed a little. We were going to give it back." "Borrowed over $200,000 in 3 years?" I said, my voice breaking. "And Melissa, you had your share too, didn't you?" Melissa stood up, slamming her hand on the table. "You always play the victim. You have everything, the house, the job, the money. What about me? I just needed a little help, and you still couldn't share." I. I stared at her, and in her angry eyes, I no longer saw the sister I once cried with as a child. I saw a stranger, hollowed out by greed. Dad hit the table, raising his voice. Enough, Alicia. Stop overreacting. Family means sharing, understanding. Don't let this tear us apart. I took a deep breath and met his eyes. Sharing? Is forging my signature what you call sharing, Dad? No one spoke. The clock ticked slowly on the wall. My mother began to cry. My father's gaze drifted away. I stood up, calm but firm. From today, I'm moving out, and I've already sent copies of all these documents to my lawyer. I don't want a lawsuit, but if anyone touches my assets again, I won't stay silent. I gathered the papers and turned to leave. Behind me, Mom called my name through tears. Dad said nothing. That afternoon, I stood on the porch, the golden light of sunset shining through the fading maple leaves. I took a deep breath. There is no true victory when you have to lose your family for it, but at least I knew I'd done the right thing. Before getting into my car, I looked back at the house once full of laughter and love, now just an empty shell of lies. I texted my lawyer a short message. Begin the process of restoring legal ownership. I'm ready. And as the engine started, I knew from that moment on, I was no longer the deceived Alicia. I was Alicia who knew her worth, and I would never again let anyone use family as a weapon to break me. 3 weeks after that confrontation, my new apartment in Louisville was finally starting to feel like home. Every morning, I'd make myself a cup of coffee, open the window to let in the sunlight, and whisper, "It's all behind me now." But the truth was, it wasn't really over. After I left home, my parents tried to contact me several times. At first, it was just short messages. "Are you okay?" Or, "Mom just wants to talk." But I wasn't ready. Every time I saw their words, the pain and disappointment returned. I had once believed that no matter what happened, family was the one safe place. Now I knew sometimes the place we call home is where the deepest wounds are made. I focused on work, taking on extra remote programming projects to distract myself. But one late afternoon, while sitting at my favorite cafe on Main Street, I got a call from my lawyer, a call that would change everything. "Alicia, our investigation is complete. There's clear evidence the authorization form was forged, and more than $350,000 has been withdrawn from your accounts over the past 3 years, most of it transferred to your father's." My grip tightened on the phone. His calm, steady voice cut through me like a knife. $350,000, it wasn't just money. It was the price of my trust. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept circling the same question. Why would they do this to me? Was family love really that fragile? Or had I been the fool building an illusion of a perfect home that never truly existed? The next morning, I received an email from my lawyer. "You have the right to pursue criminal charges for forgery and embezzlement, but we'll need your confirmation before proceeding." I stared at that line for a long time. Part of me wanted to walk away. After all, they were still my parents. But another part couldn't stay silent anymore. I thought about the sleepless nights, the years I'd worked so hard to save, and the people I loved most who quietly took it all away. That afternoon, I drove back to Lexington. A light winter rain was falling, blurring the view through my windshield. When I stopped in front of the old house, my heart pounded. The door was still the same warm brown. The bougainvillea my mother planted still bloomed bright and alive. But now, it was only a shell, a memory of something broken. I knocked. Mom opened the door. Her face was pale, her eyes red and swollen. "Alicia," she whispered, her voice trembling. I stepped inside. My father sat on the sofa, tired but still defiant. Melissa stood by the window, clutching her phone. I sat across from them and placed an envelope on the table. "I came to tell you something," I said. "The lawyer has enough evidence. If I choose to, the case can go to court tomorrow." Mom broke down crying. "Alicia, please. Your father just wanted to help Melissa. He didn't mean to take your money. I swear." I looked at my father. He said nothing, just closed his eyes. "It didn't have to come to this," I said quietly. "If you'd told me the truth from the start, I would have listened." "Yo." Melissa stepped forward, her tone sharp. "You always think you're the victim. Do you even know what it's like to feel left behind? I failed, I needed help, and all you ever do is judge." I took a deep breath. meeting her gaze calmly. If you truly needed help, you could have asked. You didn't have to steal. Love built on lies isn't love at all. The room fell silent. Then my mother dropped to her knees, clutching my hands. Please, if you go to the police, your father will have to stand trial. Don't do this, Alicia. Tears fell onto my skin. My heart twisted painfully between justice and family. Finally, I said softly, I won't press charges if you return everything and promise never to use my name on any financial documents again. But if I ever find another lie, I won't hesitate. The room stayed still. My father finally nodded, his voice rough. I understand. 2 months later, I got everything back. My assets were restored, all documents verified, and my accounts locked for protection. I moved permanently to Louisville, renting a new apartment near the Ohio River. One evening, as I sat on the balcony watching the sunset shimmer over the water, I received a letter. It was from my mother. My dear daughter, I'm sorry. I let greed and fear blind me. Your father regrets it too. Whether you forgive us or not, I just want you to be happy. I read it over and over. Tears fell, but not from pain this time. They were tears of release. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means freeing yourself from what once hurt you. That night, I wrote the last line in my journal. I lost my family, but I found myself. A year later, I published my first book, Behind the Family Walls, a memoir of betrayal, truth, and rebirth. It wasn't just about what I'd lost, but about how I rebuilt my life, learning to love myself and set boundaries. At my first book signing, a middle-aged woman came up to me with tears in her eyes. Thank you, she said softly. Your story gave me the courage to leave a place that once terrified me. I smiled. Outside the window, sunlight filtered through the trees, painting everything gold. And I realized though I had lost a family bound by blood, I had found another one. People who had been hurt, but still believed in light. Because when you choose to speak the truth, you don't just save yourself, you give others the strength to break their silence too. It's been more than a year since I left the house in Lexington. My new life in Louisville now moves at a slower, gentler pace. Every morning, I make a cup of coffee, open the window to watch people rushing down the street, listen to the birds singing on the rooftop, and whisper to myself, I'm truly free now. But sometimes on quiet nights, the memories return, my parents' faces, Melissa's laughter, and those dinners that once felt so warm. I no longer hurt the way I used to, but the scar remains, buried deep a part of who I am. I once believed that family was the one place that would never betray you. Now I know nothing is absolute. Love cannot survive without honesty. When lies seep in, they quietly eat away at everything: trust, affection, and even the person you thought you were. But because of that heartbreak, I learned something I never knew before: the strength of letting go. After Behind the Family Walls was released, I received hundreds of letters from readers. Many wrote that they too had been betrayed by their loved ones, and that my story gave them the courage to stand up for themselves. Some said they had stayed silent for years, terrified that speaking out would destroy everything. I replied to every letter I could, and with each one, I felt lighter. By sharing my story, I was no longer a victim, I became a healer. One spring afternoon, while walking by the Ohio River, I got a call from my mother. I hesitated for a few seconds before answering. Alicia, it's Mom, she said, her voice rough. Your father, he's not well. He wants to see you. I was silent for a long time before replying, I'll come. 2 days later, I went back to Lexington. The house looked the same, yet something felt different. Quiet, heavy. My father lay in bed, thinner than I remembered, but when he saw me, a weak smile spread across his face. Alicia, I'm sorry. Just 4 words, but I knew how much strength it took for him to say them. I sat down, held his hand, and whispered, You know, Dad, I was angry for a long time, but today, I don't want to carry that anymore. I forgive you. Tears rolled down his cheeks, and I realized forgiveness isn't for them to find peace. It's for us to be free. After that visit, I returned to Louisville with a different heart. I no longer looked at the past as a string of mistakes, but as lessons that shaped who I am. My family may have hurt me, but through them, I learned about boundaries and the true worth of self-respect. That June, I hosted a book signing at the city library. After I finished speaking, a young woman came up and asked, "If you could go back, would you forgive them sooner?" I thought for a moment, then smiled. "No," I said, "because forgiveness when you're not ready is just pretending. True forgiveness only comes when you're strong enough not to fear the pain anymore." She began to cry and hugged me tightly. In that moment, I understood the meaning of telling my story, to show others that even after betrayal, we can rise again, stronger and kinder. That night, I came home, opened my laptop, and wrote the final lines for my new project, a book about rebuilding after loss. I called it The Quiet Rebuild. I wasn't writing to prove anything anymore, but to thank myself, the woman who once fell apart and still found the strength to stand up again. As the night settled in, I stood on the balcony, watching the city lights shimmer on the river. The breeze brushed through my hair, carrying the soft scent of summer. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply. No more anger, no more hate, just peace after the storm. I know that someday I might see them again, my mother, my father, even Melissa. There may be no tears, only quiet greetings between people who once shared a life. And that's enough. Because forgiveness isn't about starting over, it's about ending a painful chapter with grace. I smiled and whispered to myself, "Thank you, past, for making me stronger. Thank you, pain, for teaching me to love myself." Then I walked inside, closed the window, and let the warm light fill my small apartment. There, in the quiet night of Louisville, I knew my journey had truly come to an end. And for the first time in years, I felt light enough to smile through my tears. When I finished The Quiet Rebuild, I knew I had closed the final chapter of a long journey filled with tears, betrayal, and awakening. Not everyone can rise after being stabbed in the back by their own family, but I did. Not because I was stronger than others, but because I finally understood that forgiveness is the only path to freedom. That book wasn't a story of revenge. It was a message. I wanted people to understand that family isn't always a safe place. Sometimes, the ones we love the most are the very ones who hurt us the deepest. But that doesn't mean we should lose our kindness, because if we let hatred take over, we become no different from those who hurt us. After the book launch, someone asked me, "Alicia, if you could choose again, would you still love them?" I stayed silent for a long moment before answering. "Yes," I said, "because loving isn't wrong. The mistake is when you love and forget yourself." I learned that love must have boundaries. Kindness without limits can easily become a weapon in the hands of those who exploit it. The day I signed the papers to reclaim my inheritance, I didn't just recover my finances, I reclaimed my right to be respected, something I had once given away too easily. Now, when I look back, I no longer see a tragic past. I see a woman who was once deeply hurt, yet chose to rewrite her own story instead of breaking down. I'm no longer the victim of that family drama. I'm the storyteller, turning pain into a message of healing. A year after The Quiet Rebuild was published, I was invited to speak at a conference in New York about healing after betrayal. Standing under the warm stage lights, I looked out at hundreds of faces, people who had been betrayed, who had lost faith, who had cried in silence. I told them about Lexington, about the night I discovered the truth in that dusty basement, about my father's tears, and the moment I chose to forgive. No one spoke, but in their eyes, I saw understanding and hope. I ended my talk with one sentence. Sometimes, to find yourself, you have to lose everything, even the people you thought would last forever. The room went completely silent, then erupted in long, thunderous applause. In that moment, I realized my journey was no longer just mine. It had become a reminder for everyone trapped in the cycle of pain. That night, back in my hotel room, I opened an old notebook, the same one where I had written down observations during the time I suspected my family. Between the yellowed pages, I found a scribbled line from the very first day. "I just want to know the truth." I smiled. Now, I do know the truth, not just about them, but about myself. I learned that truth isn't always easy to accept, but it's the only foundation on which we can rebuild. Because when we dare to face our pain, we learn how to walk out of it. My life no longer revolves around fear of loss. I began learning photography, traveling, meeting new people. Every photo I take carries a small story, simple, genuine moment. And I realized happiness is simple. When your heart is at peace, even a messy past can lead to a beautiful present. Sometimes my mother still calls. Her voice is softer now, slower. We don't talk about the past anymore, only about the weather, dinner, or a new book she's reading. Our relationship isn't what it once was, but it's enough to warm my heart. Melissa has moved to another state. I don't know much about her life now, but sometimes I see her photos online smiling, radiant among new friends. I just hope she's learned her own lessons too. Now, as I share this story, I don't seek sympathy. I only want to send a message that no matter how much you've been hurt, don't let pain turn you bitter. Let it teach you how to love yourself, set boundaries, and rise again on your own. Life is a series of chapters that never repeat. My chapter of betrayal, forgiveness, and rebirth has closed. But in every word I write, I want you to remember this. Family isn't where you're born, it's where you're truly loved. Quote, I closed the notebook and looked out the window. The sky over Louisville was clear and bright. I smiled, no more tears, no more regret, because at last I had found the most important thing I'd lost, myself. 6 months after everything ended, I left Lexington. The house that once held both memories and wounds was sold to a young couple. When I handed over the keys, I didn't cry. I just felt a heavy stone lifted off my chest. I decided to move to Asheville, North Carolina, a small town nestled among green mountains, where no one knew who I was and my past no longer mattered. My new home was barely 70 square meters, with a small wooden porch and a garden full of lavender. Every morning, I made a cup of coffee, opened the window to greet the sunlight, and listened to birds singing on the roof. No more shouting, no more being watched or used, just me and the quiet. At first, the emptiness lingered. Each night, as I sat alone in my kitchen, I missed those family dinners though. Now I knew they'd never truly been warm. Sometimes I almost called my mother, but I stopped. I understood that healing doesn't mean going back. It means learning to move on without carrying those who once hurt you. I began writing again, not about pain, but about rebirth. I wrote down everything. How I felt when I planted my first flower pot, the joy of smiling genuinely after so many heavy months. I titled the journal, The Second Beginning. One March morning, while wandering through the weekend market downtown, I met Lucas, the owner of a small used bookstore, with kind eyes and a gentle voice. He recognized me from the quiet rebuild and said it had helped him face his own pain. We started talking first about books, then music, and the small, beautiful things that make life worthwhile. We didn't rush anything. Everything between us unfolded slowly, naturally, as if life was trying to make amends by giving me someone who could listen without judgment. He didn't pry into my past. He only said, "What matters is that you still believe in genuine love. That's enough." For the first time in years, I felt seen not for what I had, but for who I truly was. That summer, I started a small creative writing class at the town library. I taught people how to turn emotions into words, how to write, to understand themselves better. Many of my students were people who had suffered loss, divorce, betrayal. They told me that writing helped them feel lighter. I smiled, because I knew exactly how that felt. One evening after class, an older woman said to me, "Alicia, you've turned your pain into strength. That's something not everyone can do." Her words stayed with me. In that moment, I realized I had truly made it through the storm. No more resentment, no more desire to get even, just gratitude, because only through darkness had I learned to love myself the right way. Sometimes I still get emails from readers. They tell me my story gave them the courage to leave toxic relationships, to believe that new life can begin after heartbreak. Every time I read those words, my eyes sting a little. Maybe the true meaning of survival isn't just to exist, but to help others find their light too. Now, each morning, I wake up unafraid of the past. I walk across the misty fields, breathe in the fresh air, and know that I am alive, truly alive. My life is no longer defined by those who left, but by what I choose to keep: self-respect, kindness, and the longing to be free. I once thought endings were the scariest thing in the world, but now I know sometimes endings are just life's way of opening a new beginning. And my beginning, simple, peaceful, bathed in sunlight, is the most beautiful reward for everything I've been through.